Before we continue the story, I just want to share something from my heart. Writing these stories has become more than just a hobby for me. It's something I truly enjoy and spend a lot of time creating for you all. Recently, I was looking through my channel analytics, and I noticed that many people who watch my videos don't usually leave a like or comment. I've never really been the type to ask for it, but the truth is, every like, comment, and subscribe helps these stories reach more people. It tells YouTube that this video is worth sharing, and that support genuinely helps this channel grow. So if you're enjoying the story so far, I'd really appreciate it if you take a second to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe. Your support means more than you know, and it helps me continue bringing more stories like this to life. Now, let's continue the story. My sister stole my company while I was in chemotherapy. Not metaphorically, not pushed me out. She forged my signature on executive transfer documents while I was lying in a hospital bed fighting for my life. And my father, the man who built this business alongside me for 15 years, sat at the head of the table and said the sentence that hurt worse than the cancer itself. The company needed someone strong enough to lead it. What neither of them understood was this: I wasn't just the person who built Whitaker Freight Solutions. I was the invisible system keeping it alive. And the moment they removed me from the equation, a clock started ticking that none of them could see. This is the story of what happened when I finally stopped protecting them. My name is Lauren Whitaker. I'm 38 years old, and for almost 15 years I helped build Whitaker Freight Solutions from a single rented warehouse into one of the largest regional logistics companies in Ohio. My sister Vanessa handled publicity, networking, and smiling for cameras. I handled everything else: vendor contracts, debt restructuring, payroll systems, emergency financing. Quiet problems nobody noticed because I solved them before they became disasters. Nobody appreciates the person holding a business together until that person stops protecting it. When I first walked back into Whitaker Freight Solutions after treatment, nobody knew how to act around me. A few employees smiled too quickly. Others suddenly became very interested in their computer screens. The entire office felt different, colder somehow, like I was visiting a place that no longer belonged to me. I moved slowly through the hallway because my body still hadn't fully recovered, but the deeper I walked into the building, the more obvious it became that something was wrong. Family photos had been removed from the walls near my office. New furniture sat in the reception area. Even the company slogan had changed. Then I reached my office door and stopped completely. The gold nameplate that used to read Lauren Whitaker Operations Director was gone. In its place was a new plaque with Vanessa's name on it. Through the glass wall, I could see my sister sitting behind my desk, scrolling through her phone like she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. She looked up and smiled casually. "Oh, good, you're here." I stared at the door. "Why is your name on my office?" Vanessa stood slowly and smoothed her blazer. "Because things changed while you were gone." Before I could answer, my father stepped out from the conference room beside her. He looked uncomfortable for exactly 2 seconds before replacing it with his usual business expression. "Lauren," he said carefully, "we had to make temporary leadership adjustments." "Temporary," I repeated. Vanessa crossed her arms. The company couldn't sit around waiting forever. That sentence hit me like a punch to the chest, not because of the insult, because of how easily she said it. Then she handed me a folder full of corporate transfer documents, signed during the exact weeks I was lying in a hospital bed fighting for my life. I sat in the small break room staring at the transfer documents while my hands shook harder with every page I turned. Most of the paperwork looked official at first glance. Executive restructuring forms, emergency operational authority changes, temporary voting adjustments approved during what they called my medical incapacity. But the deeper I read, the worse it became. My access to company banking systems had been revoked. My operational authority was suspended. Even my approval rights over vendor contracts were reassigned directly to Vanessa. And buried near the bottom of the final page was something that made my stomach drop completely. A signature with my name on it. except it wasn't mine. I stared at the crooked handwriting for several long seconds, while anger slowly replaced shock inside my chest. Vanessa had actually forged executive authorization paperwork while I was receiving chemotherapy treatments. The break room door opened suddenly. Daniel Ruiz stepped inside holding a coffee cup before freezing when he saw me. Daniel had managed warehouse operations for almost 9 years and was one of the few employees I genuinely trusted. But he looked nervous now, like even speaking to me might get him in trouble. "Lauren," he said quietly, "I didn't know you were back." I held up the paperwork immediately. "Did you know about this?" His face changed instantly. That told me everything before he even answered. "They pushed everything through fast," he admitted carefully. "Your sister said the company needed stable leadership." "Stable leadership," I laughed bitterly. "Vanessa doesn't even know how our debt structures work." Daniel looked toward the hallway before lowering his voice. "That's actually becoming a serious problem." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated again. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "Your sister's making decisions like somebody who thinks money magically appears because trucks keep moving." Here's what Vanessa never understood about Whitaker Freight Solutions. Logistics companies don't survive on momentum. They survive on timing. One missed payment window, one misread vendor agreement, one overlooked covenant restriction, and the entire structure collapses like a house of cards. For 15 years, I prevented those collapses before they happened. I renegotiated fuel contracts before price spikes hit. I restructured debt before lenders panicked. I kept vendors loyal during weak quarters by maintaining relationships other people didn't even know existed. Nobody celebrated those things because nobody ever saw them happen. But Daniel was telling me something dangerous was now unfolding. He closed the break room door behind him before speaking again. "Lauren, things have gotten bad faster than people realize. Vanessa started expanding almost immediately after taking over. New office renovations, luxury client events, marketing campaigns. She's trying to make the company look bigger instead of keeping it stable." I leaned back slowly, already feeling a headache building behind my eyes. That was exactly how Vanessa operated. Everything had to look impressive from the outside, even if the foundation underneath was cracking apart. "What about cash flow?" I asked. Daniel gave a short laugh without humor. "That's the problem. She doesn't understand cash flow." My stomach tightened immediately. "She signed 3 new expansion leases in 2 months," he continued, "and she approved high-interest financing to cover them." I stared at him in disbelief. "She used emergency lenders." He nodded slowly, without reviewing the covenant restrictions. Covenant restrictions were the invisible rules attached to business loans. Break those agreements, and lenders could freeze accounts, demand immediate repayment, or shut down credit access overnight. Vanessa probably never even read them. "She fired Melissa from accounting last month," Daniel added quietly. "Melissa tried warning her." "Of course she did," I muttered. Daniel looked at me carefully. "Lauren, I don't think your sister realizes the company is only surviving because of systems you built years ago." I looked back down at the forged paperwork still sitting in front of me. And for the first time since returning to the office, I stopped feeling hurt. Because suddenly, I felt dangerous. That night, I couldn't sleep. My body still ached from treatment, but my mind kept replaying everything Daniel told me. Expansion leases, emergency lenders, covenant violations. Vanessa wasn't just running the company badly. She was driving it straight toward a financial cliff without even realizing it existed. Around midnight, I finally opened my laptop and logged into one of the old backup financial portals I personally created years earlier. Vanessa had removed my visible executive access from the main system, but she clearly forgot something important. I built most of the infrastructure that kept Whitaker Freight Solutions operating quietly behind the scenes. And hidden deep inside those systems were protections nobody, except me, fully understood. The screen loaded slowly before rows of financial reports appeared. The second I started reviewing the numbers, my stomach tightened harder with every page. Vendor reserves were nearly empty. Credit utilization was dangerously high. Operating cash had been redirected into cosmetic expansion projects that generated almost no immediate return. Vanessa hadn't inherited a thriving company. She inherited a carefully balanced machine, and she was tearing pieces out of it without understanding what they did. Then I saw something that made me sit upright immediately. A new personal guarantee, filing attached to one of the emergency loan agreements. Vanessa's signature. I stared at the document for several long seconds before realizing what she had done. To secure fast expansion money, she personally tied herself to debt obligations connected to future company performance targets. Targets the business now had almost no chance of reaching. My phone buzzed suddenly. Daniel. I answered immediately. What happened? His voice sounded tense. You need to check supplier account 47A. I pulled it up quickly, and the moment the file opened, I understood why he sounded nervous. Vanessa had violated one of the company's largest vendor protection agreements earlier that afternoon, which meant something terrifying was now possible. If I stopped protecting the system, the entire company could collapse within days. Stay with me, because this is where it gets very interesting. I spent the next 2 hours sitting in darkness with financial reports glowing across my laptop screen while a storm rolled outside my apartment windows. Every document confirmed the same thing. Vanessa wasn't running Whitaker Freight Solutions. She was draining it. The only reason the company still looked stable from the outside was because invisible protections I created years earlier were still quietly holding everything together behind the scenes. And the biggest protection of all, me. Most people think businesses collapse because of one dramatic mistake. That's not true. Companies usually collapse because one experienced person stops preventing small disasters before they spread. For 15 years, I handled those disasters before anybody else even noticed them. Vanessa thought leadership meant sitting at the top of the pyramid. She had no idea I built the foundation underneath it. The next morning, Daniel met me at a quiet diner outside downtown. He slid a folder across the table before even sitting down. Former employees are starting to call me, he said carefully. People are scared. I opened the folder and immediately saw termination notices, unpaid vendor warnings, and internal accounting concerns Melissa had apparently documented before getting fired. She ignored all of this, I asked. Daniel nodded. She said people were overreacting. I leaned back slowly, exhaustion mixing with anger inside my chest. Vanessa had spent years mocking the operational side of the business because it wasn't glamorous enough for her. Now she was discovering too late that appearances don't keep companies alive. Systems do. Daniel looked at me carefully across the table. So, what are you going to do? I stared down at the paperwork for several seconds before answering honestly. For the first time in years, I said quietly, I think I'm going to stop saving them. The decision felt strangely calm once I finally made it. Not exciting, not dramatic, just quiet, like something inside me had finally stopped fighting reality. For years, I protected Whitaker Freight Solutions because I believed the company represented family, stability, legacy. But sitting there in that diner with financial warnings spread across the table, I realized something painful. I was the only person still treating the business like something worth protecting. Everyone else was treating it like a trophy to control. Over the next week, I began reviewing every emergency safeguard connected to the company. Vendor protections, deferred payment agreements, personal guarantee stabilizers, lines of credit that only existed because lenders trusted my operational oversight. Vanessa had no idea how many partnerships were tied specifically to my involvement behind the scenes. She thought the business survived because of branding and aggressive growth. In reality, it survived because people trusted me to prevent chaos. Daniel helped me organize documentation late into the evenings, while former employees quietly reached out with stories about Vanessa's leadership. Experienced staff had been replaced with cheaper hires. Financial concerns were dismissed during meetings. Anyone who questioned her decisions became negative or disloyal. The deeper I looked, the clearer it became. Vanessa wasn't building an empire. She was setting fire to one while posing for magazine photos in front of the flames. Then Friday afternoon happened. I received an automated lender notification tied to one of the expansion loans Vanessa signed months earlier. At first glance, it looked routine. But when I opened the attached compliance report, my pulse slowed instantly. One major supplier had officially terminated cooperation with Whitaker Freight Solutions, which triggered a cascading covenant review across multiple company loans. And buried near the bottom of the notice was the sentence Vanessa never expected to exist. Immediate financial protections remain active pending Lauren Whitaker authorization status. I stared at that sentence for nearly a full minute before saying anything. Daniel sat across from me in silence, watching my expression carefully while rain tapped softly against the diner windows. Finally, he leaned forward. "What is it?" I turned the laptop toward him. His eyes scanned the document quickly before widening. "Wait, they still need your authorization." I nodded slowly. Because years ago, I tied several emergency protections directly to my operational oversight. Daniel leaned back hard in his seat like the realization physically hit him. "Vanessa has no idea, does she?" "No," I said quietly. "She thought removing my title removed my control." But titles were never the real power inside Whitaker Freight Solutions. Knowledge was, relationships were, trust was, and almost every important lender, supplier, and logistics partner trusted me far more than they trusted flashy presentations and expensive expansion plans. Over the next few days, things inside the company started cracking faster than even I expected. Vendors delayed shipments. Creditors requested emergency reporting updates. 2 longtime clients quietly suspended contract renewals after hearing rumors about internal instability. Vanessa kept posting smiling company updates online pretending everything was thriving, while fires spread underneath her feet faster than she could hide them. Then came the family dinner. Vanessa insisted everybody meet at my father's house Sunday night to celebrate the company's future. Even after everything happening behind the scenes, she still acted like she was standing on top of a growing empire instead of unstable debt. The second I walked into the dining room, I knew the dinner wasn't really a celebration. It was a performance. Vanessa spent the entire evening making passive-aggressive comments about how some people disappear when things get difficult, while my father nodded along beside her. Then she smiled directly at me across the table and lifted her wine glass. "Luckily," she said loudly, "the company finally has leadership that isn't weak." At that exact moment, her phone started ringing. And the second she answered it, all the color drained from her face. Vanessa stood up from the dinner table so fast her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "What do you mean frozen?" She snapped into the phone, while everyone else in the room went silent. My father lowered his fork slowly, confusion spreading across his face as Vanessa paced toward the kitchen. Even from across the room, I could hear the panic rising in her voice. "No, that's impossible," she said sharply. "We already submitted the compliance reports." I sat quietly and took a sip of water while my pulse stayed strangely calm. Because deep down, I already knew exactly what had happened. The supplier termination triggered the covenant review. The covenant review triggered lender protections. And once lenders started digging into the company finances, the entire illusion Vanessa built was beginning to crack apart. My father looked at me across the table. "What's going on?" he asked carefully. Before I could answer, Vanessa stormed back into the dining room, gripping her phone tightly. Her face had completely changed. The confidence from earlier was gone. "The bank temporarily froze one of our operational credit lines," she said quickly. "It's just a misunderstanding." I finally spoke for the first time in several minutes. "Which lender?" She hesitated before answering. "Mid-Central Commercial." Mid-Central held the company's largest expansion debt package. If they froze lending access, everything else could collapse behind it like dominoes. They're overreacting because one supplier pulled out, Vanessa said defensively. One supplier, I repeated quietly. That supplier handled almost 30% of our freight network. She glared at me instantly. Don't act like you suddenly care about the company now. I looked directly at her. I never stopped caring, you just stopped listening. Then my father's phone buzzed beside his plate. He picked it up, frowned at the screen, and slowly looked back at Vanessa. The board scheduled an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning, he said carefully. And for the first time all night, Vanessa looked genuinely afraid. The emergency board meeting started at 9 the next morning, but the tension inside the conference room felt heavy long before anyone spoke. Bank representatives sat along one side of the table, flipping through financial reports, while board members whispered quietly among themselves. Vanessa entered 15 minutes late wearing an expensive white blazer and the same confident expression she always used when she thought appearance could solve problems. But the second she saw me sitting beside Daniel near the far end of the room, her entire posture tightened. "What is she doing here?" Vanessa asked immediately. One of the board members answered before I could. "Lauren still holds secondary operational authorization status tied to multiple financial protections." Vanessa frowned like she genuinely didn't understand the sentence. That alone told me everything. She had taken over the company without even learning how it functioned underneath the surface. The lead bank representative opened a folder slowly. As of this morning, Whitaker Freight Solutions has violated 3 active debt covenants connected to supplier continuity and liquidity requirements. My father sat forward quickly. "Can this be fixed?" The banker gave a careful look toward me before answering. "That depends." Vanessa crossed her arms immediately. "This is temporary. We're already negotiating replacement partnerships." "No," I said calmly for the first time. "You're negotiating panic." The room went quiet. I reached into my folder and slid several documents across the table toward the lenders. Vendor protection agreements, operational guarantee structures, emergency stabilization clauses I personally created years earlier. For the past decade, I explained quietly, many of the company's financial protections remained active because lenders trusted my operational oversight. Vanessa stared at me. "What are you talking about?" I looked directly at her. "You removed my title. You forgot to remove the systems keeping the company alive." The lead banker adjusted his glasses carefully before speaking again. "Ms. Whitaker, we were also informed this morning that Lauren Whitaker officially withdrew personal stabilization guarantees connected to your emergency expansion loans." And just like that, the entire room changed. Because everyone suddenly realized the company wasn't collapsing overnight. It had simply stopped being protected from the consequences. Vanessa looked around the conference room like she was waiting for someone to tell her this was all a misunderstanding. But nobody spoke. The bank representatives stayed focused on their documents. Board members avoided eye contact completely. Even my father looked shaken, not angry, just confused in the way people get when they suddenly realize they never understood the situation they were supposedly controlling. "This doesn't make any sense," Vanessa said sharply. "You can't just destroy the company because you're upset." I stared at her calmly across the table. "I didn't destroy anything." Then I slid another folder toward the board members. Inside were copies of the forged authorization documents filed during my hospitalization. Financial approvals carrying signatures that weren't mine. Executive transfer forms pushed through while I was receiving treatment. The second the legal advisor opened the file, the atmosphere inside the room changed again. "Vanessa," my father said slowly, staring at the paperwork, "what is this?" She immediately straightened defensively. "Those were emergency actions." "With forged signatures," the legal advisor asked carefully. Vanessa's face lost color instantly. For the first time since this started, she had no confident response ready. The lead banker closed his folder and folded his hands together. Based on the covenant violations and operational instability, all remaining credit protections are suspended effective immediately. My father looked stunned. What does that mean exactly? It means, the banker replied calmly, Whitaker Freight Solutions no longer meets the conditions required to maintain current financing structures. Vanessa turned toward me with pure disbelief in her eyes. You bankrupted the company. I shook my head slowly. No, you did that when you removed the person keeping it stable. The room fell silent again. Then the legal advisor spoke quietly. There's another issue. He lifted the emergency expansion loan agreement Vanessa signed months earlier. And finally, she realized the worst part of all. Her personal assets were attached to the collapsing debt. The meeting ended less than an hour later, but by then Whitaker Freight Solutions was already collapsing in real time. Lenders froze operational accounts. Credit protections disappeared. Vendors started demanding immediate payment, guarantees the company could no longer provide. The business that took 15 years to build was suddenly unraveling faster than anyone in the room thought possible. Except me. Because I knew the company had been fragile for months. I was just the last support beam holding it upright. Vanessa stayed frozen in her chair long after everyone else stood up. My father kept asking the legal team questions in a panicked voice, trying to understand how things spiraled this far without him noticing. But the truth was simple. He spent years listening to the loudest person in the room instead of the most capable one. As I gathered my paperwork quietly, Vanessa finally looked up at me. Her makeup was smeared slightly now, and for the first time in my life, she didn't look confident or polished. She just looked scared. You planned this, she whispered. I shook my head calmly. No, I prepared for the day people stopped respecting the work I did. She stared at me without speaking. And honestly, I didn't feel victorious the way I thought I would. Mostly, I felt tired. Tired of protecting people who only valued what they could publicly take credit for. Tired of being invisible until something broke. Over the next few months, the company entered restructuring while investigations into the forged documents continued behind closed doors. Vanessa lost most of what she gained from the takeover. My father tried calling constantly at first, but eventually the calls became less frequent when he realized I wasn't coming back to fix everything anymore. Instead, I started consulting independently for logistics companies across the state. And here's the part that still makes me laugh sometimes. Businesses were now paying me specifically for the skills my own family spent 15 years treating as invisible. About 6 months after everything collapsed, I ran into Daniel again at a logistics conference in Chicago. He laughed the second he saw me standing near the coffee station. You look healthier, he said. And for the first time in years, I actually felt healthier too. Not just physically, emotionally, mentally. Like I had finally stepped out of a life where I spent every day carrying pressure nobody else even noticed. My consulting business had grown faster than I expected. Companies hired me specifically for crisis prevention and operational restructuring. The same invisible skills my own family dismissed were now the exact reason other businesses trusted me completely. Turns out stability becomes very valuable the moment people understand how rare it actually is. Daniel and I talked for nearly an hour before he mentioned Vanessa. She's still blaming you for everything, he admitted carefully. I nodded without surprise. That's easier than admitting she didn't know what she was doing. He studied me for a second. Do you hate her? That question stayed in my head long after the conversation ended. Because honestly, no, I didn't hate Vanessa anymore. Hate requires emotional energy, and I was finally done spending my energy cleaning up damage other people created. What I felt instead was distance. Clear, healthy distance from a version of my life where I made myself smaller so someone louder could look bigger. A few weeks later, my father sent me a long email apologizing for not listening sooner. He admitted he confused confidence with competence for years, because Vanessa always sounded certain in meetings, while I quietly solved problems without asking for attention. That part hurt more than the apology helped. because it confirmed something I already suspected. People overlook the quiet person holding everything together simply because chaos is louder than consistency. We are conditioned to reward performance over substance, volume over depth, confidence over actual competence. And if there is one thing this experience taught me completely, it's this. Never underestimate the person doing invisible work. Because when they finally stop protecting everything around them, people suddenly realize how much was standing on their shoulders the entire time. A year after leaving Whitaker Freight Solutions, I drove past the old warehouse one last time. The giant company sign was gone now, replaced with temporary leasing banners hanging crookedly across the front fence. Half the loading docks sat empty. The parking lot that used to stay full from sunrise to midnight looked abandoned except for a few scattered trucks near the back entrance. I parked across the street and just looked at it quietly. 15 years of my life inside those walls. 15 years solving emergencies at 2 in the morning, protecting payroll during bad quarters, keeping vendors calm during financial scares nobody else even knew happened. I used to think sacrificing yourself for a business proved loyalty. Now I understand something different. Real loyalty should never require you to disappear for other people to shine. Vanessa spent years wanting ownership without responsibility. My father wanted peace without asking difficult questions, and I spent too long believing that staying quiet made me strong. It didn't. It made me useful to people who confused my silence with permission. As I pulled away from the curb, my phone buzzed with another consulting request from a transportation company in Texas dealing with restructuring issues. The message ended with a sentence that almost made me laugh out loud. We were told you're the person companies call when everything is falling apart. For years, my family acted like my work wasn't important because it happened behind the scenes. But here is the truth that changed my life more than revenge ever could. The most valuable people in any organization are usually the ones nobody notices until they're gone. And the moment you stop shrinking yourself to make others comfortable, the moment you finally let people experience the full weight of what you were quietly carrying for them, everything changes. Not just for them, for you. If you've ever been the person doing invisible work while someone else took the credit, if you've ever been called not leadership material by someone who couldn't survive a week without your support, drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. And if this video reached you at a moment when you needed to hear it, share it with someone who's been carrying too much for too long without anyone noticing. Hit subscribe if you believe competence should outrank confidence. And like this video, so the algorithm puts it in front of someone who spent too long making themselves invisible for people who never deserved that sacrifice. Thank you for being here.